Poison Song, Book 1 by Briston Zell. It was beginning again. Even though everything seemed serene, the last embers crackling in the hearth, a young servant girl and her child slumbering in a chair by the door, a tapestry half finished against the wall, waiting to be completed tomorrow. One of the moons visible through a milky cloud outside the window. A lone bird, out of sight in the rafters, cooing placidly. Tay heard the first chorus of the song strike dissonantly somewhere far away. The bird in the rafters croaked and took flight through the window. The baby in the girl's arms woke and began to scream. The song swelled in intensity, yet still remained subtle and stately in tempo. The movement of everything seemed to take the rhythm of the music, as if strange choreography had been staged. The girl rising to the window, the clouds reflecting were back red from the inferno below. Her scream, all muted, consumed by the song. Everything that came thereafter Tay had seen so many times, yet it almost ceased to be a nightmare. He did not remember anything of his life before coming to the island of Gorn, but he understood that there was something different in his past that set him apart from his cousins. It wasn't simply that his parents were dead. His cousin Bainara's cousins' parents had also died in the war. Nor were the other housemen on Gorn or nearby Mournhold unusually cruel to him. They treated him with the same polite indifference that any Indoril has for every other 8-year-old boy that got underfoot. But somehow, with absolutely certainty, Tay knew he was alone, different, because of a song he always heard and his nightmares. "You're certainly imaginative," his aunt Ululia would smile patiently, before waving him away so she could return to her scriptures and chores. Different? Everyone in the world thinks they're different. That's what makes it such a common sentiment, said his older cousin, Kalkorith, who was studying to be a temple priest and had a firm grasp on paradoxes. If you tell anyone else that you keep hearing music where there is no music to be heard, they'll call you mad and bury you in the shrine of Sheogorath, his uncle Triffith would snarl, before striding away to attend his business. Only his nursemaid, Ediba, would listen to him seriously and just nod with a faint look of pride, but she would never say another word. His cousin and chief playmate Bainara was by far the least interest in the stories of his song and his dreams. "How tiresome you are with all of this, Tay," said Bainara, after luncheon the summer of his 8th year. She, and a younger cousin, Vaster, walked into a clearing in the midst of the flowering trees. The grass was very low, barely up to their ankles, and there were big black piles of leaves from the previous autumn. "Now, shall we get back to it? What shall we play?" Tay thought for a moment. "We could play the Siege of Orsinium." "What's that?" asked Vaster, their constant companion, 3 years their junior. Orsinium was the home of the orcs, far off in the Rothgarian mountains. For hundreds of years it kept growing bigger and bigger and bigger. The orcs would come down out of the mountains and rape and pillage all over Hyrark. And then King Joile of Daggerfall and Gaiden Shinji of the Order of Daigna, and someone else, I forget, from Sentinel all joined together against Orsinium. For 30 years they fought and fought. Orsinium had walls made out of iron, and try as they might, they couldn't break through. "So what happened?" asked Binara. "You're so good at making up things that never happened. Why don't you make it up?" And so they did. Tay was the king of the orcs, perched up in a tree they called Orsinium. Binara and Vastar played King Joil and Gaiden Sinji, and they threw pebbles and sticks up at Tay while he pardon me. While they threw pebbles and sticks up at Tay while he taunted them in his most guttural voice. The three decided that the goddess Kinnereth, played by Binara in a dual role, answered the prayers of Gaiden Sinji and drenched Orsinium with a torrent of rain. The walls rusted and dissolved. On cue, Tay obligingly fell from the tree and let King Joily and Gaiden Sinji mangle him with their enchanted blades. For most of that summer, the year 675 of the First Era, Tay was nearly insensible by the power of the sun. There were no clouds, but it rained most every night, so the vegetation on the island of Gorn was bewilderingly lush. The stones themselves seemed to glow with sunlight, and the ditches burned with white meadowsweet and parsley down. All around him were soft smells of flower and tree, untroubled by wind. The foliage was purple-green, blue-green, ash-green, white-green. The wide cupolas, twisting cobbled steps, and thatched roofs of the little village of Gorn, and the massive bleached rock of Sandil House were all magical to him. Yet the dreams haunted his nights, and the song continued whether he was awake or not. Against Aunt Ulia's admonishments, Te Benira, and Vastar had breakfast outdoors every morning with the servants. Ulia would hold an interior breakfast for herself and any visiting dignitaries. Guests were rare, so she often ate alone. At first, the servants would dine in silence, attempting gentility, but they broke down and would regale the children with gossip, reports, stories, and rumors. "Poor Ernley is laid up with a fever again. I'm telling you, they're cursed, the whole lot of them. Piss on the fairy and they'll piss right back on you. Doesn't little Miss Darcia look, just a wee bit tight around the belly region lately? She's not." The only servant who didn't speak at all was Tay's nursemaid, Ediba. She wasn't pretty like the other maids, but the scars on her face did not deform her. Her poorly set, broken nose and her short hair gave her a certain alien mystique. She would merely quietly smile at the gossip and look at Tay with almost frightening love and devotion. One day after breakfast, Binara whispered to Tay and Vastar, "We have to go to the hills on the other side of the island." She had used such imperatives before and always had something wonderful to show. A waterfall tucked away behind the ferns and tall rocks, a sunny grove of figs, a discreet still some peasants had set up, a sickly oak, a twisting twisted into a kneeling human figure. A collapsed stone wall that they imagined was thousands of years old, the last refuge of a doomed princess they named Marilla. The three walked across through the forest until they came to a clearing. A few hundred feet beyond, the meadow sank into a dry creek bed, filled with small, smooth stones. They followed that into the dark woods where the trees canopied high over their heads. Sporadic red and yellow blossoms burst along the moist underbrush, but they became rarer and rarer as the children marched on under the umbrageous oaks and elms. The air crackled with birds ticking a staccato of choral piece, a minor chord of the song. "Where are we going?" asked Tay. "It's not where we're going, it's what we're going to see," replied Vaynara. The forest surrounded the children completely, bathed them in its tenebrous hues, breathed on them with white chirrups and sighs. It was easy for them to imagine that they were within a monster, walking along its twisted spine of stones. Vaynara scrambled up the steep creek and peered through the thick mass of shrub and tree. Tay lifted Vaster out of the creek bed and climbed out, gripping soft grass for support. There was no path through the forest here. Brambles and low-hanging branches struck at them like the claws of chained beasts. The cries of the birds became ever more stertorous, as if angered at the invasion. One limb drew blood on Vaster's cheek, but he didn't cry out. Even Vaynara, who could pass like an ethereal creature through impenetrable forests, had a braid catch on a bramble, ruining the intricate pattern a servant had woven hours before. She paused to pull out the other braid so that her bright, unruly tresses fell freely behind her. Now she was something wild, a nymph guiding the other two through her woodland domain. The song began to beat like a wild pulse. They were on a shelf of stone below a cliff overlooking a tremendous gorge. Staring over an expanse of cinder, it looked like a scene of a tremendous battle, a holocaust of fire. Charred boxes, weaponry, animal bones, and detritus too annihilated to be identifiable, littered the ground. Speechless, Tay and Vaster stepped into the black field. Vaynara smiled, proud that she had finally found something of true wonder and mystery. "What is this place?" asked Vaster at last. "I don't know," Vaynara shrugged. "I thought at first that it was some kind of ruin, but now I think it's a junk pile. Just not like any junk pile I've ever seen. Just look at this stuff." The three began an unorganized survey of the dusty mounds of refuse. Vaynara found a twisted sword only lightly blackened by flame and began polishing it to read the inscriptions on the blade. Vaster amused himself by breaking brittle boxes with his hands and feet, imagining himself a giant of unbelievable strength. A battered shield attracted Tay. There was something about it that reverberated with the sound of the song. He pulled it out and wiped its surface clean. "I've never seen that crest before," said Vaynara, looking over Tay's shoulder. I think I have, but I don't remember, Tay whispered, trying to conjure the memory from his dreams. He was sure he had seen it there. Look at this, Vaster cried, interrupting Tay's thoughts. The boy was holding up a crystal orb. As his hand moved over the surface, brushing away grit and dust, a key in the song rose, which sent a shiver through Tay's entire body. Bainara ran over to look at Vaster's treasure, but Tay felt paralyzed. Hmm. Where did you find that? She gasped, gazing into the swirl beneath the crystal surface. Over in that wagon, Vaster gestured toward a heap of blackened wood, barely discernible from the other piles, but for its cart spokes. Bainara began digging into the half-collapsed structure, so only her feet could be seen. The song built in potency, sweeping over Tay. He began walking toward Vaster slowly. Give me that, he whispered in a voice he could barely recognize as his own. No, Vaster whispered back, his eyes locked on the colors reflected in the heart of the globe. It's mine. Bainara dug through the remains of the wagon for several more minutes, but she could find no treasures like Vaster's. Most everything within was destroyed, and what remained was commonplace by any standard. Broken arrows, armor shards, war bones. Frustrated, she pulled herself out into the sunlight. Tay was alone at the edge of the great gorge. Where's Vaster? Tay blinked and then turned back to his cousin, with a shrug and a grin. He went back to show everyone his new plunder. Did you find anything interesting? Not really. We really ought to get home before Vaster tells them anything that'll get us in trouble. Tay and Bainara started the walk back at a quick pace. Tay knew that Vaster would not be there when they got back. He would never be returning home again. The crystal globe rested snugly in Tay's satchel, hidden under a pile of junk he had picked up. With all his heart he prayed for the song to return and drown out the memory of the gorge and the long silent fall down. The boy had been so surprised he hadn't even had time to scream. All right. Book 2. Tay felt no guilt, which frightened him. All through the long, fast walk away from the gorge, through the woods, across the dry creek bed, he chattered merrily with Bainara, fully aware that he had just committed murder. Whenever his mind strayed from the conversation and he thought back on that last moments of Vaster's short life, the song would soar. He could not think of the boy's death, but Tay knew he was responsible. You're a mess, cried Aunt Ulaya the moment she saw the two children emerging from the woods onto the grounds of Sandal House. Where have you been? Didn't Vaster already tell you? Asked Tay. The scene played itself out as Tay knew it would, every dancer in the song performing their steps as choreographed. Aunt Ulaya saying that she had not seen Vaster. Bainara, not yet frightened, making up an innocent lie about the threesome not having strayed far, saying he must have gotten lost. a slow but steady rhythm of panic intensifying as night began to fall, and Vaster had not yet returned. Baynara and Tay, tearfully, he was surprised how easily it was for him to cry without feeling, admitting where they had been, and then leading Uncle Triffith and a crowd of servants to the junk pile and gorge. The tireless search through the woods as the night turned to dawn, the weeping, the light punishment, merely cries of anger that Baynara and Tay suffered for losing their young cousin. It was thought from their stricken expressions that the children felt guilty enough. They were sent to bed at dawn while the hunt through the woods continued. Tay was drifting to sleep when his nursemaid Ediba came into his room. The look of unwavering love and devotion had not left her eyes, and he sank gratefully into his dreams and nightmares with her holding his hand. The song wafted almost imperceptibly through his consciousness as he again had the vision of the room in the castle, the girl and her baby, the bird in the rafters, the dying fire, the sudden explosion of violence. Breathless, Tay opened his eyes. Ediba was stealing out the door, softly humming the song to herself. In her hand was the crystal globe from his satchel. For a moment he hesitated, about to cry out. How did she know about the song? Was she aware that he had murdered another boy to get the globe? Somehow he knew that she was helping him, that she knew all and loved him and sought only to protect him. The next day and the next week and the next month were all the same. No one spoke very much, and when they did, it was to suggest new places to look for the missing boy. Everywhere had been searched thoroughly. Tay was curious why they never looked in the gorge, but he understood how inaccessible it was. A side effect of Vaster's absence was that the tutorial sessions with Kenna Gaffersey took on a more serious, even academic quality. The younger boy's high spirits and meager attentiveness had always cut the lessons short, but sensible Baynara and quiet Tay were ideal pupils. He was particularly impressed by how focused they became during a rather dry history lecture about the heraldic symbols of the houses of Marwyn. The crest of the Hallow features a scale, he sniffed disdainfully. They see themselves as the great compromisers, as if that were something honorable. Many hundreds of years ago, they were the tribesmen following Rezdayan who chose. Pardon me, Kenna, asked Baynara, but what is the crest with the insect on it? You don't know House Redoran? Asked the tutor, lifting up one of the shields. I know you have a sheltered life on Gorn, but you are surely old enough to recognize. No, not that one, Kenna. I think, replied Tay, I think she means the other crest with an insect. I see, nodded Kenna Gafrisi, brow furrowed. Yes, you would be too young to have ever seen the crest of the sixth house, the house of Dagoth. Our enemies, together with the accursed heretical Dwemer in the War of the Red Mountain, now totally destroyed, thanks be to the Lord, Mother, and Wizard. That house was a curse on our land for millennia, and when at last their pestilence was snuffed out, the very earth itself breathed a cloud of fire and ash in relief, bringing night to day for over a year's time. Baynara and Tay knew they could not speak, but they exchanged knowing glances at each other as the tutor enlarged on the theme of the great wickedness of the Dwemer and the house Dagoth. As soon as the lesson ended, they walked silently out of Sandal House until they were far from all ears and eyes. The afternoon sun stretched out the shadows of the spear-like trees surrounding the meadow. Off in the distance they could hear the sounds of the workers beginning their preparations for the autumn-tide harvest, yelling to one another unintelligibly in coarse and familiar accents. That was definitely the symbol on that shield you found at that garbage heap, Baynara said at last. Everything there must be a remnant of the house Dagoth. Tay nodded. His mind was on the strange crystal globe. He felt a light vibration of the soundless music touch his body, and he knew he was discovering a new cadence of the song. Why would our people have burned and discarded all of that? He asked thoughtfully. Do you think the house Dagoth was so evil that everything associated with them could have been cursed? Baynara laughed. At the height of day, all talk of curses and the evil sixth house were pure supposition, something to add romance to one's life, but nothing to worry about. The children walked back to the castle for yet another in a series of cold, quiet dinners. As the night fell, Baynara looked through the treasures she had picked up in the junk heap. By the light of the moons, the small jars, the torque with orange gemstones, the bit of tarnished silver, and gold of no obvious purpose, all took on a sinister aspect. Revulsion overtook her feeling of admiration instantly. There was a strange energy to them, a tincture of death and corruption that was undeniable. Baynara ran to the window and vomited. Looking out to the dark open lawn below, she saw a figure below lighting an arrangement of candles in the shape of a large insect, the symbol of the house Dagoth. When it looked in her direction, she pulled back, but she saw the face illuminated by the tallows. It was Ediba, Tay's nursemaid. The next morning, Baynara left the castle grounds early, bearing a large sack filled with her treasures. She carried them to the dumping ground and left them there. Then she returned and told her uncle Triffith what she had seen the night before, leaving out only what had made her sick in the first place. Ediba was banished from the Isle of Gorn without discussion. She wept, begging to be allowed to say goodbye to Tay, but all believed that would be too dangerous. When Tay asked what had become of her, he was told she had to return to her family on the mainland. He had grown too old for a nursemaid. Baynara never told him what she knew, for she was afraid. All right. 8 hours, 20 minutes, and book 3 of the Poison Song. Tay was 18 in the year 685 of the First Era when he first saw Mournhold, the city of spires, the home of the goddess. His cousin Talcorith, already a senior initiate in the temple, gave him a couple rooms on the ground floor of the house he had purchased. They were small and unfurnished, but bitter green grew outside the windows, and when the wind blew, they filled his bedroom with a lovely, spicy air. The chords of the song did not trouble him any more. Sometimes he was even unconscious to it, so low and melodic it had become. Occasionally, when he was passing through the streets on the way to the temple for his instruction, someone would pass him, and the song would rise in intensity before falling away again. Whatever was different about those people, Tay never tried to ascertain. He remembered the last time he had let the song lead him, and called for him to murder his young cousin Vaster. The memory did not trouble him unduly, but he did not want to hurt anyone again unless he had to. House couriers regularly brought Tay letters from Bainara, still back at Sandal House on the Isle of Gorn. She might have gone to study at the temple. She was certainly intelligent enough, but she chose not to. In a year or two at most, she would have to leave and assume her place in House Indoril, but she was not in a hurry. Tay welcomed the trivial, gossipy news and the letters brought, and responded back with news of his own studies and romances. In his third month in Mournhold, he had already met a girl. She was also a student at the temple, and her name was Akra. Tay wrote enthusiastically about her to Bainara, describing her as having the mind of Sotha Sil, the wit of Vivek, and the beauty of Alamexia. Bainara replied back merrily that if she had known how blasphemous students of the temple were allowed to be, she might have become an initiate herself. "You are very devoted to your cousin," Akra laughed when Tay showed her the letter. "Am I looking at the last remains of a thwarted romance?" "She's lovely, but I never thought of her that way," Tay scoffed. "Incest never particularly interested me." "Is she a very close cousin, then?" Tay thought for a moment. "I don't know. Truthfully, no one spoke much of either her parents or mine, so I really don't know how we were connected. They were casualties of the War of the Red Mountain, that I know, and it seemed to cast a pall on the adults' humor whenever we asked about her parents or mine. After a while, we stopped asking. But you're an Indoril, too. Perhaps you're a closer cousin to me than Bainara." "Perhaps so," Akra smiled, rising from her chair. She uncoiled her hair, which had been pulled up in the formal arrangement reserved for well-born priestesses. As Tay watched, transfigured, she removed the small brooch that fastened her robe to her shoulder cape. The soft silken fabric slipped down slowly, exposing her dark, slender body to him for the first time. "If we are, does incest particularly interest you now?" As they made love, the song began a slow, rhythmic ascension in Tay's head. The vision of Akra before him darkened and was replaced by images from his nightmares before returning again. When finally he collapsed, spent, the room seemed filled with the fiery red clouds of his dream, and the scream of the woman and her child facing death echoed in his head. He opened his eyes, and there was Akra smiling at him. Tay kissed her, grateful to have her in his arms. For the next 2 weeks, Tay and Accra were never far apart. Even when they were at study in opposite wings of the temple, Tay thought of her and somehow knew she was thinking of him. They would rush to be together afterwards, ravishing one another in his rooms every night, and in a private corner of the temple garden every day. It was while Tay was rushing to see his beloved one afternoon that the song rose up in powerful strident songs at the approach of an old ragged woman. He closed his eyes and tried to quiet it, but when he looked again at her purchasing cork-balled papyrus from a street vendor, he knew who she was. His old nursemaid from Gorn, Edaba, she who had abandoned him without even a farewell to join her family on the mainland. She didn't see him, and as she passed down the street, Tay turned and began to follow. They walked through shadowy passages into the very poorest part of the city, a quarter which was as alien to him as the wildest principality of Akavir. She unlocked a small wooden door on a street without a name. He finally called out her name. She didn't turn, but when he followed, he found that the door had been left ajar. The chamber was murky and damp like a cave. She stood facing him, her face even more wrinkled than he had remembered it, etched with lines of sorrow. He closed the door behind him, and she took his hand and kissed it. "You are so tall and strong," Edaba said, beginning to weep. "I should have killed myself before I let them take me away from you." "How is your family?" Tay asked coldly. "You are my only family," she whispered. "The Indoril pigs forced me to leave, thrusting their blades in my face, when they discovered that I serve you and your family, not them. That bitch girl Baynara saw me at a prayer of mourning." You're speaking like a mad woman," Tay sneered. "How could you love me and my family but hate the House Indoril? I'm of the House Indoril." "You are old enough to know the truth," Edaba said fiercely. Tay had bitterly joked about her madness, but he saw something close to it burning in her ancient eyes. "You were not born of the House Indoril. They brought you into their house after the war, like they and the other houses brought in all the orphans. It was the only way they saw to erase history and remove all traces of their enemies, by raising their enemies as one of them." Tay turned toward the door. "I can see why you were taken away from Gorn, old woman. You are delusional." "Wait," Edaba cried, rushing to a musty cabinet. She retrieved from it a glass globe that shimmered with a spectrum of color even in the chamber's gloom. "Do you remember this? You slew that little boy Vaster because he possessed it, and I took it from your room because you were not ready to face the facts of your inheritance and responsibility then. Did you not wonder why this bauble drew you so?" Tay gasped, and though he did not want to, he said, "I hear a song sometimes." "That is the song of your ancestors, of your true family," she said, nodding. "You must not fight it, for it is a song of destiny. It will lead you to do what must be done." "Shut up," Tay howled. "Everything you say is a lie. You're insane." Edaba threw the globe to the ground with all her might, shattering it with a deafening retort. The shards melted into the air. All that was left was a small silver ring, simply wrought with a flat crown. The old man, the old woman quietly picked it up and handed it to him, while he stood with his back against the door, trembling. This is your inheritance as the bearer of the sixth house. The ring's crown was meant for stamping and sealing official house proclamations. Tay had seen his uncle Trithis' similar ring, crested with the wing which was the seal of House Indoril. This ring was different, with an insect design which he remembered from the day when Kenna Gafrisi had taught the house heraldry to Bainara and him. It was the symbol of the accursed House Dagoth. The song took over all of Tay's senses. He heard its music, smelled its horror, tasted its sadness, felt its power, and the only thing he could see before him was the flames of its destruction. When he took the ring and placed it on his finger, his mind was not aware of what he was doing, nor was Tay aware of anything but the song. When he removed his dagger from its sheath and thrust it into his old nursemaid's heart. Tay did not even hear her final words when Ediba fell bleeding to the ground and groaned with a blood-streaked smile, "Thank you." When the veil of the song lifted, Tay did not realize at first he was no longer dreaming. Before him had been flames, the very one that had destroyed the home of his birth, and flames were before him again. But they were flames from a fire he had struck outside the crumbling tenement that were already bursting through the walls, consuming the body of his old nursemaid. Tay fled through the streets as people began to call for the guards.